1,350 tons of steel. A barrel, 32.5 meters long, firing charges each weighing 7 tons. Its caliber so vast, an adult human could easily climb inside. This was no fever dream from a forgotten blueprint, no wild fantasy. This was a very real weapon, forged, transported, and aimed directly at Sevastopol by Germany. It was christened Heavy Gustav and remains, to this day, the largest rifled artillery piece ever deployed in actual combat throughout human history. Its sheer scale defied belief. Transporting this Leviathan demanded a specialized railway convoy, 25 wagons stretching a full 1.5 kilometers. To merely assemble it on the battlefield, 4,000 men toiled relentlessly for 5 weeks. Another 500 soldiers were then required for its operation, a human ant colony dedicated to a single, monstrous purpose. This colossal machine, this ultimate instrument of siege, materialized from the singular obsession of Adolf Hitler, to utterly crush any fortification daring to impede his path. The year was 1934. The German High Command approached the Krupp industrial giant in Essen with an unprecedented demand. France, across the border, was nearing completion of the Maginot Line, an immense defensive network. Hundreds of reinforced concrete forts, casemates and bunkers, interconnected by subterranean tunnels, boasted walls up to 7 meters thick, armored with meter-deep steel plates. For over a decade, France had poured its resources into this barrier, convinced of its absolute impenetrability. And they had every reason to be. No artillery piece known to man at that time could breach such a formidable defense. Not one. The mandate for Krupp's engineers was starkly simple, yet profoundly insane. Design a weapon capable of obliterating any Maginot Line fortification from a distance so great that French artillery could never retaliate. Krupp engineer Erich Müller undertook the calculations. His chilling conclusion: such a task would require a gun with a caliber of approximately 80 centimeters, firing 7-ton shells from a 30-meter barrel. The entire structure would exceed 1,000 tons, necessitating transport on 2 parallel railway tracks simultaneously. Various designs were drafted: 70, 80, 85 centimeters, even a 1-meter caliber. Yet no final decision had been rendered. Then, in March 1936, Adolf Hitler himself visited the Krupp factories in Essen. He inquired about the progress of these colossal gun projects. While no direct command for immediate production was issued that day, the message was clear. Design work on the 80-centimeter model accelerated with an unnerving intensity. By early 1937, the blueprints were finalized, approved. By mid-year, the physical fabrication of the first weapon had begun. The project received a name, a purpose, and a terrifying legacy. But as the steel cooled and the first shell was loaded, did anyone truly grasp the monstrous precedent being set? What hidden costs did the world pay for this singular obsession with absolute destruction? A name whispered in the chilling annals of warfare: Gustav. It honored Gustav Krupp von Bohlen und Halbach, a senior director of the infamous Krupp firm. This naming convention, a long-standing German tradition, bestowed human monikers upon their heaviest artillery, a chilling echo of the Big Bertha from the First World War. Hitler demanded this colossal gun by the dawn of 1940. His invasion of France hinged on its devastating power. Yet the sheer technical complexities of forging such massive steel components proved insurmountable. The initial timeline shattered. Every single element of the design, from the colossal barrel to the intricate breech, required an entirely new conception. Nothing of its kind had ever existed. Despite these unprecedented challenges, Krupp delivered an initial test model by late 1939. It shipped to the Hillersleben Proving Ground for evaluation. High-angle firing tests confirmed the audacious calculations. A 7-ton armor-piercing shell ripped through the specified 7 meters of concrete and 1 full meter of solid steel armor plate. The weapon performed as promised. Spring of 1940 arrived. Hitler, consumed by a desperate urgency, yearned to unleash his offensive against France. Ideally, his new supergun would pulverize the Maginot Line. But Gustav remained unready. The Führer's fury was palpable. German generals, however, found a swifter, more cunning solution. Instead of a frontal assault on the Maginot Line, German forces executed a flanking maneuver. They bypassed the formidable fortifications entirely, sweeping through the dense forests of the Ardennes in Belgium, terrain the French High Command had mistakenly deemed impassable for tanks. A fatal miscalculation. France fell with shocking speed. Europe's most powerful system of fortifications became a monument to strategic obsolescence. The enemy had come not from where they were expected, but from the perceived impossible. The Maginot Line, after its circumvention, was eventually besieged by conventional heavy artillery until France's capitulation. The colossal gun, it seemed, was obsolete before it even saw battle. But Hitler refused to abandon his monstrous brainchild. Early in 1941, Alfred Krupp personally hosted Hitler at the Rügenwalde Proving Ground. There, the official acceptance trials for the weapon took place. The Führer watched with his own eyes as his creation belched fire and destruction. He was reportedly extremely satisfied. 2 such weapons were immediately commissioned. The first, Ritani, with a price tag 7 million Reichsmarks. It was christened Dora in honor of the project's lead engineer's wife. A staggering sum, even then, for a weapon whose strategic purpose was already questionable. Now, Hitler merely needed to find a worthy target for his mechanical behemoth. By the summer of 1942, the Eastern Front had devolved into a protracted, blood-soaked campaign for Germany. Operation Barbarossa, launched a year earlier with lightning-fast victories, had gradually bogged down in the relentless, savage resistance of the Red Army. German forces had seized vast swaths of the Soviet Union. Yet, on the southern tip of the Crimean Peninsula, one city remained defiant, refusing to fall: Sevastopol. This fortress city, at the time, was considered one of the most heavily fortified positions in the world, a title it had earned with every layer of concrete, every hidden gun emplacement, every meter of its formidable defenses. It was a wound that festered in the German advance, a symbol of unbroken Soviet resistance. What kind of systemic blindness, then, allowed such an extravagant, strategically redundant weapon to consume so much resource and will, even as the tide of war began to turn? Long before the war's first shot, Sevastopol was already an impenetrable bastion, forged by engineers and military minds into a true citadel. Its coastal batteries, some armed with colossal caliber guns, could unleash fire across both sea and land targets, a terrifying prospect for any aggressor. Concrete fort walls reached thicknesses unheard of. Individual bunkers and ammunition depots buried as deep as 30 meters beneath the earth, impervious to any conventional bomb or shell. Over 100,000 soldiers and sailors formed its garrison, prepared to defend Sevastopol to their last breath. Marines, infantrymen, artillery crews, all understood the city's strategic imperative, a linchpin for the entire southern defense sector. Its fall would not merely be a tactical defeat, it would unravel the entire southern front, opening a gaping wound in the Soviet defense. The German siege began in the autumn of 1941. Each passing month revealed the brutal truth. This nut would not crack with standard tools. Assault after assault shattered against the Soviet defenses, each wave of attackers swallowed by the unyielding concrete and the defenders' grim resolve. Conventional artillery rounds merely chipped at multi-meter concrete. Aerial bombardments, while devastating the city above ground, proved utterly impotent against the deeply entrenched subterranean complexes. The sheer scale of underground construction meant critical infrastructure remained untouched, mocking the Luftwaffe's efforts. It was then that the German High Command made a chilling decision: deploy Gustav. This was not merely a weapon, it was an admission of strategic failure, a desperate gamble on a technological leviathan to break a human will that conventional force could not. This monstrous cannon, the largest ever built, represented the ultimate escalation, a last resort against an unyielding fortress. February of 1942 saw the 672nd Heavy Artillery Division of Special Purpose reorganized, beginning its ominous march. Gustav embarked on its arduous journey to Crimea. A train of 25 wagons, stretching for 1.5 kilometers, crawled across territories already choked by the German Army's eastern supply demands. This colossal convoy became a vulnerable artery, a logistical nightmare requiring immense resources. Each wagon demanded intensified security. The loss of even one component meant the impossibility of assembling the colossal weapon at its destination. Sabotage, partisan attacks, or even a single well-aimed aerial strike could cripple the entire operation, turning a strategic asset into an embarrassing heap of scrap metal. The stakes were impossibly high. By early March, the monstrous convoy reached the Perekop Isthmus, where it was held for nearly a month before finally being allowed into Crimea. This delay, a testament to the logistical chaos and the sheer difficulty of moving such an unprecedented piece of machinery, only heightened the tension. Every day Gustav was not in position, German casualties mounted, and the siege dragged on. Upon its eventual arrival on the peninsula, an equally monumental task commenced on site. German engineers constructed a dedicated railway spur 16 kilometers north of the target, branching off the main Simferopol-Sevastopol line. This was no ordinary track. It was a bespoke artery for a weapon that defied conventional movement. At the spur's terminus, 4 semicircular tracks were laid, specifically designed for Gustav's horizontal aiming. Its barrel could only elevate vertically. To shift its aim to a new target, the entire gargantuan structure had to be moved along these curved rails, a slow, cumbersome dance of steel and precision. Outer tracks supported cranes, vital for assembling the weapon's immense components, each weighing hundreds of tons. The assembly procedure itself was an exercise in brutal labor. 4,000 men toiled for 5 weeks to bring Gustav into combat readiness, a human tide against an engineering marvel. Their sweat and strained muscles constructed a machine designed for pure destruction, a testament to industrial might harnessed for war. Camouflage became a separate, urgent imperative. Soviet aviation, despite heavy losses, remained active around Sevastopol. A structure the height of a 4-story building simply could not remain unseen from the air. The Germans erected a vast, elaborate concealment around Gustav, a deceptive forest of netting and false structures, an attempt to hide a weapon so large it defied all attempts at subtlety. What other monstrous tools, what other desperate measures lie hidden beneath the surface of history's most brutal conflicts? What systemic failures demand such colossal, terrifying responses. An entire ecosystem of deception materialized around it. Artificial hills, sculpted from earth and logs, rose to obscure its form. Camouflage nets, vast and intricate, draped over its monstrous silhouette. Dummy positions, strategically placed, drew the eye, diverting any aerial reconnaissance away from the true horror hidden beneath. When Soviet aircraft dared to pierce the skies above, specialized units sprang into action. They blanketed the entire area around the weapon with a thick, impenetrable wall of smoke, erasing its presence from the pilot's sight. Hundreds of men, a dedicated legion, toiled relentlessly, their sole purpose to ensure the absolute invisibility of one single, solitary gun. Installation began in early May. By the 5th of June, 1942, the colossal weapon stood fully prepared to unleash its fire. Gustav, as it was known, rested on its rails, a titan of steel and engineering. It stretched nearly 47.5 meters in length, supported by 40 axles and 80 wheels. Its barrel, angled skyward, promised to hurl a 7-ton shell, a staggering distance of up to 48 kilometers. A crew of 500 took their stations, every preparation complete. Opposite them, mere kilometers away, behind the formidable concrete walls of their forts, the Soviet defenders of Sevastopol remained. They were unaware of the unprecedented force about to be unleashed against them. They did not know they faced the largest artillery piece ever deployed in the history of warfare. On the 5th of June 1942, Gustav roared to life. Its first targets were not the formidable forts, as might have been expected, but Soviet coastal batteries, positioned at a distance of 25,000 meters. 8 shells, one after another, tore through the air towards the coastline. The concussive blast from each discharge resonated for many kilometers, a sound previously unheard on any battlefield. It was the guttural cry of an 80-centimeter barrel, ejecting a projectile the size of a small car into the heavens. After the coastal batteries were shelled, the crew redirected their fire. Their next target, Fort Stalin, a crucial nexus in the Soviet defenses. 6 more shells rained down upon it. Soviet soldiers, sheltering behind the massive concrete, felt the earth-shattering explosions, but the fort itself remained defiant. Its garrison held firm. Slammed into the fortification. Yet the outcome remained far from what the Germans had anticipated. The overwhelming destructive power seemed to dissipate against the resilient Soviet defenses. Then came the target that would become the gun's singular, undisputed achievement throughout its entire combat career. The Germans aimed Gustav at an objective known as White Rock, or the ammunition garage. This was an underwater ammunition depot, nestled deep within Sevastopol's North Bay. The depot lay hidden 30 meters below sea level, shielded by a formidable 10-meter layer of concrete. By the standards of any other weapon, this was an absolutely invulnerable target, concealed beneath a crushing weight of water and reinforced concrete. No conventional bomb, no standard artillery shell could ever hope to reach it. 9 shells from Gustav were fired at this submerged stronghold. The barrage shattered the storage facility. One vessel, anchored in the bay above, sank beneath the waves. This was the only instance where the weapon achieved its intended, decisive destruction. A single, isolated triumph, born from an unimaginable investment of resources, manpower, and engineering genius. What, then, does this solitary victory truly reveal about the nature of overwhelming force and the fragile line between engineering marvel and colossal futility? The Gustav cannon, a monument to industrial might, was heralded by its creators as an unqualified success. Yet, the truth of its deployment against Sevastopol paints a starkly different picture. On June 7th, the immense artillery piece engaged in a supporting fire mission for an infantry assault on the Südwestspitze strongpoint, a forward defensive node. 7 shells were unleashed, tearing through the sky towards enemy positions. But the actual impact, the tangible effect of this colossal bombardment, remained deeply questionable. Reloading an 80-centimeter caliber weapon was an agonizing ordeal. It demanded a full complement of highly specialized personnel, operating with a precision bordering on ritual. Each shell, a monstrous projectile weighing as much as a fully loaded truck, had to be wined of brute force and delicate calibration. Consumed so much time that an entire day of combat operations might yield only a handful of shots. The rhythmic, devastating barrage expected of artillery was utterly absent. Instead, there were isolated 4 days later, on June 11th, Gustav turned its attention to Fort Siberia. 5 shells were fired at the fortification. German observers, peering through the haze of battle, reported the fort neutralized. A fleeting moment of perceived triumph. An isolated entry in the ledger of destruction. Then, a silence descended, stretching for almost an entire week. On June 17th, the colossal gun spoke for the final time in this campaign. 5 more shells were directed towards the Maxim Gorky forts, fortifications renowned as some of Sevastopol's most formidable strongholds. With those 5 rounds, Gustav's combat operations concluded. Over the 12 days the cannon was active, a mere 47 shells had been expended. 47 colossal projectiles, each a blunt instrument of war weighing tens of thousands of pounds, hurled toward Sevastopol from the largest artillery barrel ever conceived. What was the ultimate tally? 1 submarine ammunition depot obliterated. 1 fort allegedly neutralized. Everything else? A scattering of craters in the Crimean soil, a testament to raw power, and a collection of dubious entries in combat logs. The strategic impact, the decisive blow it was designed to deliver, simply failed to materialize. The inherent problem lay in the very physics of its operation. An 80-centimeter caliber and the colossal mass of its projectile meant that even the most minuscule deviation in initial trajectory translated into hundreds of meters off target. Wind, temperature, humidity, the precise condition of the powder charge, every variable in the atmosphere conspired against accuracy. At this scale, the margin of error became utterly unmanageable. The immense energy required to propel such a mass made precision an elusive phantom. But a far more serious problem lurked beneath the surface, one with devastating long-term implications. The Gustav's barrel was wearing out at a catastrophic rate. The colossal pressures, the infernal temperatures with each discharge, literally tore apart the rifling within the gun's bore. By the conclusion of its engagement at Sevastopol, the original barrel was completely expended, its internal structure ravaged beyond immediate use. Considering approximately 250 shots had already been fired during factory trials and fine-tuning, the barrel's effective lifespan was shockingly brief, its resource utterly depleted. The weapon, designed as a game-changer, required a complete re-outfitting with a spare barrel. The worn-out original was shipped back to the Krupp factories in Essen, a monumental logistical undertaking, solely for the painstaking process of re-rifling. For a weapon intended to be the decisive argument on the battlefield, such a barrel longevity was, quite frankly, laughable. Meanwhile, the Soviet defenders of Sevastopol continued their relentless struggle. Red Army soldiers and Black Sea Fleet sailors, entrenched deep within their fortifications, showed no signs of retreat. Their resolve remained unbroken, even in the face of the largest gun ever built. What does it reveal about the true cost of technological overreach, when the most powerful weapon ever forged proved to be little more than an immensely expensive, slow-firing, and ultimately ineffectual monument to a flawed strategy? For years, German forces hammered Sevastopol, not just with a dense barrage, but with an onslaught of heavy artillery and relentless bomber raids. Yet the city's garrison clung to its ground with an unyielding tenacity, repelling assault after assault. Even Gustav, with its monstrous, unprecedented power, could not break that defiant defense. The German High Command found itself in an acutely precarious position. A weapon, the culmination of years of development and colossal resources, had delivered results under the Sevastopol sun that were, to put it mildly, catastrophically short of expectations. 47 shots fired. Only one incident, a submarine ammunition depot, could be confidently claimed as a success. For an instrument of such immense scale and staggering cost, this was not merely a setback, it was an abject failure. Publicly, silence reigned. Gustav remained a pet project of Adolf Hitler, a testament to his personal vision. To critique the Führer's decisions in 1942 was to invite the swift and brutal end of a career, if not a far worse fate. The truth was buried beneath layers of strategic imperative and political fear. German propaganda painted an entirely different canvas. The deployment of Gustav at Sevastopol was presented as a towering triumph of German engineering, irrefutable proof of the Wehrmacht's indomitable might. Newspapers and newsreels hailed the gun as a miracle of military technology. Its actual effectiveness, its dismal firing record, vanished from the narrative, unspoken, unacknowledged. Sevastopol did fall on July 4, 1942. But its capitulation was not a testament to the giant gun's destructive force. By the time the city surrendered, its ruins had absorbed an estimated 30,000 tons of artillery munitions from weapons of all calibers. Gustav's contribution to that inferno was a negligible fraction. The city succumbed to a combined assault of infantry, conventional artillery, and air power, after a siege that had stretched for months. Throughout this brutal ordeal, its defenders fought with unimaginable courage. Red Army soldiers and sailors held their ground until the very last breath. Even when the situation became utterly hopeless, countless men continued their desperate fight amidst the rubble, within the labyrinthine underground communications, in every shattered basement, in every crater. Victory came at a staggering price for the Germans. Gustav's role in that price was infinitesimally small. After Sevastopol, the colossal weapon was meticulously dismantled and shipped north. Gustav was transported towards Leningrad, a city that had already endured more than a year of relentless blockade. The gun was reassembled and positioned 30 kilometers from the city, near the Tatsi railway station. Its new objective? A planned, massive strike against Leningrad's fortifications. Equipped with a fresh replacement barrel, its Sevastopol-worn counterpart discarded, Gustav stood fully prepared to fire. The planned assault on Leningrad, however, never materialized. The monstrous weapon remained silent, frozen in its position throughout the brutal winter of 1942 into 1943, without discharging a single round. 1,000 tons of steel, a 100-man crew, an entire purpose-built infrastructure. All of it stood idle, inert, amidst the snow-covered suburbs of Leningrad, while the besieged city continued its agonizing struggle for survival. What does it say about power when its ultimate expression becomes nothing more than a monument to its own profound irrelevance? The behemoth known as Dora, the second of its kind, embarked on its own journey to the Eastern Front. Late in August of 1942, its colossal components arrived at a designated position, a mere 15 kilometers west of Stalingrad. By September 13th, the monstrous weapon stood fully assembled, primed for its devastating debut. Yet the strategic calculus around Stalingrad was shifting with brutal speed, turning irrevocably against the German war machine. The Red Army, with chilling precision, was meticulously orchestrating Operation Uranus, a grand encirclement designed to trap Paulus's Sixth Army. The specter of a crushing Soviet counteroffensive loomed larger with each passing day. The moment of stark realization arrived. As the Soviet pincer movements threatened to snap shut, Dora, the ultimate siege weapon, was hastily dismantled. It was evacuated, ignominiously, without ever firing a single shot in anger. A weapon forged to annihilate Soviet resistance was instead forced to flee from the very soldiers it was meant to crush. It was a retreat, not of men, but of 1,000 tons of steel, a symbol of strategic impotence. By 1943, the tide of war had turned with an irreversible ferocity across all fronts. The catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad had forced the German army onto a desperate defensive posture along most sectors. The grand offensive operations, the very scenarios for which Gustav was conceived, simply ceased to exist. Transporting a train, stretching 1.5 kilometers, composed of 25 specialized wagons, became a logistical nightmare. Germany's railway networks, already choked by the desperate demands of supplying retreating armies, could not bear the burden. The skies, once dominated by the Luftwaffe, now belonged increasingly to the Allies. That exposed, sprawling train, a steel serpent across the landscape, presented an irresistible target for Allied bombers. Gustav, the supposed superweapon, became a prisoner of its own gargantuan scale. What appeared formidable on blueprints, in the brutal, fluid reality of a rapidly evolving war, transformed the weapon into an unmanageable liability. It could not be deployed effectively, nor could it be moved with any semblance of speed. Its sheer size, once its terrifying advantage, was now its fatal flaw. In 1944, as the Warsaw Uprising erupted, desperate plans surfaced to deploy the super-heavy weapon against the Polish resistance. The Germans did unleash other heavy siege artillery against the rebels, but the uprising was brutally crushed before Gustav could even be prepared for firing. This incident merely underscored the weapon's inherent, crippling defect. Events on the front lines, particularly in the chaotic crucible of urban warfare, unfolded with a speed that utterly dwarfed the weeks required to assemble and ready a 1,000-ton construct for battle. Gustav was always irrevocably too late. The war surged forward, leaving it stranded, a cumbersome, impotent relic. It stood as a monument to engineering hubris, a testament to a grand design that could not keep pace with an unforgiving reality. Spring of 1945. The Third Reich was in its death throes. Soviet forces surged westward with unstoppable momentum. From the west, American and British armies pressed relentlessly. German cities lay in pulverized ruins, the consequence of incessant Allied bombing raids. The nation's once vaunted railway network was shattered beyond repair, rendering the movement of even basic supplies an impossible task. Gustav, by this point, held absolutely no combat value. A weapon demanding a 1.5-kilometer train and weeks of meticulous preparation for relocation, in a Germany reduced to rubble, was nothing more than an inert pile of steel. There was nowhere left to move it, and nothing left to shoot. The very concept of its deployment had become an obscene joke. In the face of total collapse, What then does such a colossal failure truly reveal about the architects of war, about their blind faith in overwhelming force, and the inherent fragility of even the most terrifying instruments of destruction when confronted with the inexorable tide of history? On April 14, 1945, just one day before American forces arrived, German sappers executed an order. They annihilated the behemoth known as Gustav. Explosive charges were meticulously placed within the structural linchpins. The weapon, a testament to years of Krupp's finest engineering, collapsed into a grotesque, twisted mass of steel. 5 days later, on April 19th, the same fate befell Dora at the Grafenwohr proving ground. Two of the largest artillery pieces ever conceived by humankind met their end, not on the battlefield, but by the hands of their own creators. A deliberate act of self-destruction, a preference for ruin over capture. April 22nd. American soldiers stumbled upon Gustav's remains, deep within a forest, 15 kilometers north of Auerbach, roughly 50 kilometers southwest of Chemnitz. Before them lay a scene of utter devastation. A ruptured barrel, a mangled carriage, scattered fragments of colossal mechanisms. The Americans documented the discovery. Then they moved on. The war raged. A giant scrap heap in the woods held no practical value for them. Its strategic significance had evaporated. That same summer, Soviet specialists meticulously examined Gustav's wreckage. By autumn, it was transported to Merseburg, a hub where the Soviet Union meticulously collected captured German technology for forensic analysis. Soviet engineers sought to dissect the German ambition, to understand what colossal failure they had unearthed. The failures were manifold, glaringly obvious to any clear-thinking artillery officer. 5 weeks for assembly. This meant that by the time the weapon was operational, the tactical situation on the rapidly shifting front lines had often changed beyond recognition. A rate of fire measured in a few shots per day rendered Gustav useless in any dynamic engagement. It was a static monument to impotence. Its barrel, degraded after a mere few dozen rounds, transformed each deployment into a one-time, disposable event, demanding months of factory replacement and re-engineering. Accuracy. Insufficient even for targeting major fortifications. This fundamental flaw questioned the very rationale behind a weapon of such immense caliber. What was the point of a cannon designed to obliterate if it could not reliably strike its intended target? The logistical tale. A monstrous train of 25 railway cars, thousands of personnel for operation, maintenance, and security, a specially constructed railway infrastructure for every deployment. Each use of Gustav became an Army Corps-level operation, consuming vast resources for a handful of dubious impacts. Germany paid an astronomical price for this strategic folly. Years of dedicated design work, thousands of tons of high-grade steel diverted from critical war production, 7 million Reichsmarks for the second weapon alone, a sum that could have funded entire divisions of conventional arms. Thousands of individuals, engineers, technicians, railway workers, security forces, their labor, their expertise, their very lives consumed by this single, extravagant project, all poured into a gun that, throughout the entire conflict, fired just one time at Sevastopol, stood idle and useless outside Leningrad, and arrived too late for the Warsaw Uprising. Imagine those resources, redirected, applied to the production of conventional tanks, aircraft, or even the basic ammunition that frontline soldiers desperately needed. What might have been the true cost of this obsession with gigantism, not in steel and marks, but in the lives it could not save, the battles it could not win, and the war it ultimately accelerated to its brutal conclusion. The German army gained little from its two colossal guns. Far more beneficial would have been field artillery, tanks, or ammunition. One of these monstrous cannons never even fired a single shot at the enemy. The same Soviet soldiers who endured the deafening roar of the Gustav gun outside Sevastopol's walls found themselves storming Berlin by the spring of 1945. Those targeted by history's largest artillery piece fought their way from Crimea to the German capital, ultimately ending the war. Sevastopol's defenders held their ground not by luck, but through the unparalleled skill of Soviet fortification engineers, the garrison's unyielding bravery, and an unbreakable will to fight until the very end. No supergun, no engineering marvel could shatter that resolve. This is the chilling lesson of the Heavy Gustav. No weapon, no matter its immense scale, can conquer people who refuse to surrender. But what systemic failures allowed such a colossal, ineffective project to consume vital resources while the human cost mounted?